Welcome to another edition of Coffee Break with Paolo. I'm Paolo von Schirach, your host and president of the Global Policy Institute, a Washington, D.C. think tank. This podcast is brought to you by Bay Atlantic University, located in downtown Washington, D.C., just 2 blocks from the White House. This series is produced by Switch and Board, also located in Washington, D.C. Today, we are talking about immigration, a complicated issue which stirs deep emotions. America, we all know this, is a country of immigrants. However, at present and going forward, how much immigration do we want? What kind of immigration? And what about refugees or asylum seekers and many other related issues? To shed light on this, we have with us today 2 great experts. We've got Linda Rahal, managing partner of Tro and Rahal, and a business immigration law firm here in the Washington, D.C. area, and Elizabeth Kohler Maya, managing partner of Bromberg, Kohler, Maya, and Petri, I hope I pronounced it correctly, yes, an immigration law firm. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
I thought that maybe we could get started with something which is in the headlines, and that is we know that the Supreme Court here in the federal highest court of the federal government pronounced something on asylum laws, and we know that the Trump administration tried to modify the understanding and meaning and interpretation of asylum, who qualifies from asylum, who doesn't, and the Supreme Court had its say. What does it mean? I'll turn this to you, Elizabeth. What's the story?
Thank you, Paolo. So yesterday, the Supreme Court issued a stay against a ruling that had been issued by a lower court, the Ninth Circuit, which had put a temporary pause on a policy that the Trump administration had enacted by regulation, but without following the usual procedures that a regulation is enacted. And the regulation that the Trump administration was enacting, and which is now able to go forward, severely limits the ability of asylum seekers at the southern border. It makes them ineligible for asylum if they've passed through a third country and have not first sought and been denied asylum in that country. Now, most of the asylum seekers that present themselves at the southern border have transitioned through another country, either Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico. And so it puts an additional requirement on them to seek asylum first in those countries.
Okay, let's
I
please.
just had a question. If you're a Mexican, would that mean that you first have to try and, if you're seeking asylum, they're basically the only ones who can directly come to the U.S. and seek asylum now.
Correct.
And the other ones need to seek asylum in a third country.
Yes.
So basically, for our audience to understand, because this is kind of a little complicated, and unless you're really into it, my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, most of these asylum seekers come from Central America, right? No, not all of them, but
not all of them. For the vast majority, yes. However, with additional restrictions on other options for coming into the U.S., we are seeing other nationals coming through the southern border, particularly Cubans and Venezuelans. And then occasionally we see individuals from countries even further.
But in other words, what it seems so far, I mean, these things are never really settled, for good. But it would appear that the Supreme Court has given a nod somehow to the Trump administration, say it's okay to narrow the pool of eligible applicants. Is that a fair assessment of what the Supreme Court just did?
It is. It's not a final, as you said, substantive ruling, but procedurally and for all intents and purposes, it's a green light for this policy.
Again, let's step back a little bit, and you know a lot more about this than most people. And typically, for the lay person, an asylum seeker, you picture somebody who's been persecuted, right? Either for political reasons or for religious reasons, right? Or for being a part of an ethnic minority in a country. And that therefore they escape, literally, fearing for their lives. They escape that country and come, it could be the US or it could be any other country. And there are, international norms that says, yes, these people should be granted asylum on sort of humanitarian ground, because if they are denied asylum, they have to go back to their country, their lives may be seriously in danger. Whereas it appears, again, this seems to be a political issue here, that the argument is, look, these people are not real asylum seekers. In some cases, yes, they may be fleeing violence or whatever that exists in their countries, but these are essentially people who come here for economic reasons. Is that a fair, or is that a political distortion, or is that fair to characterize it this way? And therefore, the argument is this is not really about asylum. These are people who come here to seek a better life.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an unfair characterization. I think if you look at what's happening in these countries, it's a lot more than just widespread poverty. We talk about El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, the countries of what we call the Northern Triangle. The murder rates there are some of the highest in the world. The stories we hear that people face, the violence that their family members have experienced, I think, this goes a lot deeper than just poverty. I think additionally, you have to look at the fact that despite all of the roadblocks and aberrations of due process that the administration has thrown up over the past year and a half to try to deter these people from coming. I think the fact that they continue to seek safety in the U.S. is an indication of that. I mean, the journeys and the hardships they could go through alone just to get here, and then having to stay in Mexico, face danger there, face even additional poverty there, I think is further indication that there's more that they're
some
fleeing.
People would say, but wait a minute, these countries border Mexico. Mm-hmm. Can't they seek asylum in Mexico? Why aren't they doing that?
They're not safe in Mexico for the most part.
Yeah, please elaborate on that.
Well, I mean, the violence exists in Mexico too, and the gangs are there, and the people they're fleeing can follow them easily into Mexico and are already there. So it's not really a safe haven for them.
So that's not really an option.
Not for them. No, it's not going to help them very much.
So they can't say, okay, I'm just across the border, Guatemala, whatever, I can jump into Mexico and say, Mexico, help me.
And
can't
then
do
logistically, how does that work? I mean, they've got, their clothes on their back, and they're trudging through a river or walking down, through the night, and they're supposed to find some government building in Honduras or Mexico or Guatemala to apply for asylum.
Okay.
I think also, when you think about it, we don't put the same requirements on someone seeking asylum from a country in Africa or, the Middle East, Syria, these countries, to first seek asylum in a neighboring country. I mean, there are other provisions in the asylum law that take into consideration when someone's been firmly resettled in another country and then, just chooses to come to the United States. But I think this is a different concept.
And if we look back over the generations, I mean, my parents, grandparents, and most people's grandparents, they came here maybe due to political need, but a lot of them came here for economic opportunity.
Absolutely,
I mean, that is how this country was formed.
Populated, yes. Of course, one of the arguments, again, is that right now, given this stream of asylum seekers, I guess there are other types of immigrants as well, but that then I guess the people who are handling the agencies that are handling all this, Homeland Security, whoever, Border Patrol, whoever is involved from anybody from, I guess, ICE to Health and Human Services, they say, can't handle this, too many people. We don't have facilities. I mean, I guess most recently, didn't the Congress pass some supplemental appropriations to fund additional, am I correct? Additional operations at the border.
I believe so.
So how, again, this is a technical issue. That's not a legal issue. But some people have said we just don't have the facilities to properly manage and process and streamline all these people given their large numbers. Is there anything we can do about it? I mean, I know this is not a legal question.
In some part, these large numbers were created by the policy of build the wall. We're going to keep all of you out. We're not going to let anybody else in. So the numbers have increased dramatically since this administration came in, and people feared that they would never be able to, if I'm never going to be able to do it in the future, I might as well do it now.
Okay.
And so the numbers have increased. And so in part, this is a self-created crisis, if we want to call it a crisis.
All right.
And the other thing that I wanted to highlight is a lot of people say, make these people come in legally. I want people to come the legal way. So if there are those asylum seekers, but if they are economic, there's no way for them to come here legally. And I don't think a lot of people quite understand that for people without a bachelor level degree or without education, there's no work visa for them. There's no full-time. There are some temporary, very short-term temporary, seasonal work visas for people, but there's no work visa for people to come in and do jobs in restaurants and hotels and farms and things like that. So those people come and work illegally because there is no legal mechanism.
I see. But can this, is there some kind of a loophole here, some kind of a, how can I say, defect, if you wish, on our immigration laws? Could the U.S., I guess the U.S. Congress would have to act on this and take up the legislation to update, if you wish, our laws in order to allow people who at the moment don't have a legal avenue, as you pointed out, to come in? Is that in the works?
It's not in the works now, but it's been proposed before to allow 300,000 or 400,000 visas for people to come and work in these jobs where really Americans don't want them. We see restaurants shutting down. We see businesses along the beach shutting down because they can't find workers. So if there was a type of visa, then you can say, okay, come here legally, apply for these visas, and if not, then we're going to keep you out.
All right. Well, so much. Okay, so basically for the moment, let's say there's a kind of maybe a tactical victory for the Trump administration, thanks to the Supreme Court. But again, we know these things will be revisited, and we don't know exactly what the end game is going to be on this asylum seekers issue mostly from Central America. Let's talk about legal immigration, right? What we have in the books right now. So there are several avenues, I guess, for legal immigration. It could be for work-related matters, and so to have work visas, and then other people can be sponsored, right, by relatives who are already legally in the U.S. either as permanent residents or citizens. Talk a little bit about that, and how is that working? Again, because we heard also from the Trump administration that they want to turn the screws
their goal is to cut legal immigration in half. They announced that, I think, at the beginning of the administration, and they're doing it not through regulation, but through adjudications, tightening up on the meaning of a word in a regulation, which we can get into later. But really, there are two main avenues to come here. It's either through family or through employment. You need to be sponsored either by an employer or by a family member that's other than asylum. There's also the lottery system that we allow once a year. People can come in through the lottery system.
I know several people who got here through the lottery, believe it or not. Yes.
And then we have the investor green card program, which is employment creation. So it's really employment or family or asylum. And family is you can sponsor immediate relatives only. So it's your parents, your children, and your siblings. Those are the only ones. You can't sponsor a cousin, an uncle, an aunt, or anything like that. And spouses are the immediate relatives. On the employment side, Most of the visas are geared towards the highly skilled or the highly educated and mostly require a bachelor's degree at minimum or some evidence of exceptional ability or extraordinary ability.
Let's talk numbers. Roughly speaking, how many of these work visas are issued every year? Or how many in practice, how many of these cases are processed every year, roughly?
Roughly. I'm not even sure I have an accurate number, 300,000 maybe, somewhere around there.
So these are people who are sponsored by a potential employer, right? Who then says, yes, we want this person because they have the ability to do the job. And doesn't it have to be that they have, in other words, that they have to prove that they've sought to cover that position with an American and couldn't find the right person, or not? Or is
no,
that not
that's
the
for permanent residence or for a green card application.
Oh, only for that.
So
for work visas, no.
Work visas, the main one, like people who graduate from Bay University, they're in F1 student status. They get usually 12 months of optional practical training when they graduate. If they have a STEM degree, they're eligible for up to 36 months total of optional practical training. During that time, they usually apply for what is known as an H-1B, which requires that the position offered is a professional position, a specialty occupation, and that the person has a bachelor's degree that relates to that occupation. And so that's one avenue.
But that visa has a limited duration, right?
That
How many
visa,
years is that?
A 6-year maximum, unless your employer sponsors you for a green card, and then it can be extended beyond the 6 years. Another type of visa is for multinational companies where they want to transfer people in and out of the United States. That's an L1 visa. So those are kind of what we call our bread and butter, and they have become significantly more burdensome. I used to file them. I've been doing this a very long time as a paralegal before law school. With maybe 10 pieces of paper went in to get an H-1 approved, and now they go in about 6 inches deep of documentation and information. And I used to do 5 in a day, and now it probably is, it takes 3 to 5 weeks to do one from start to finish.
Again, this is probably just a vulgarized critique that you see in the media or even in people from Congress that say, well, through these work visas, American companies simply get cheap labor. In other words, they get somebody from India or whatever to work for them at a lower wages than the prevailing wages of the United States. And so this is some way to reduce their costs and in the same time shortchange would-be applicants from the United States. And so this is a big sham. Is there any? I know this is your business.
There is some abuse of the system, and that any system has some abusers. I always say it's like an employer. If you have one bad employee, do you make policies for your whole company based on one bad employee, or do you address that one bad employee? So they know who their bad actors are. But in general, the H-1B requires that you pay a person a prevailing wage, which is the average wage for that job in that geographic location.
That region, yes.
So it does require a prevailing wage. The L1 visa does not. And
what's L1?
L1 is intercompany transfer.
Oh, yes. For big multinationals.
For small or large multinational companies who want to transfer people into the United States. And it was developed for that purpose, to facilitate business. If they can't get people in here, they're not going to they're going to close down their subsidiary and move out elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Also, from my exposure to the H-1B program, there's a lot involved for an employer to take on, even filing for an employee. There's fees involved that they have to pay. There's a time commitment. They have to provide, a lot of documents. And then there's the uncertainty because the H-1Bs are capped right now at 65,000 per year, and the demand is much greater. I think it's about less than a 50% chance.
Yeah, so there's 65,000 H-1Bs for people with bachelor's degrees and another 20,000 for people who have graduated from U.S. universities with master's degrees, so a total of 85,000. And last year there were close to 200,000 H-1B petitions filed in the first week of April,
So
which
double.
is
More than double.
yeah, and now the way they select the lottery for the H-1B does heavily favor people with master's degrees. So if you're going into the H-1B cap just graduated with a bachelor's degree, your chances are less than 50%. And if you've got a U.S. master's degree, it's probably more of 60 to 70% that you might get selected for an H-1B. So I think part of what happens as a result of that H-1B lottery is foreign students are going, well, if I come to the university in the U.S. and I graduate, but I can't get a job there, then maybe I should go to university somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think we see the enrollment of foreign students starting to decline in the United States as a result of that.
Interesting. What do you say about these ideas, both of you floated, around policy circles and in the Congress to say, well, maybe, our system is outdated, outmoded. We should really move into a new system. And again, I heard, and you can enlighten us. Why don't we do like what the Canadians are doing or the Australians are doing? That they have not entirely, but at least a chunk of their new immigrants examined through a point system, I guess, of qualifications in terms of the skills and abilities that, according to those who vet applicants, they can bring to the country and get sort of kind of a priority point system. How does that differ from what we have? Do you think this is viable? Do you think this has merit? What do you say?
It's not to say our immigration system doesn't need help. It is. There's a lot that can be done to improve it. There can be changes made. I mean, what we call the family fourth preference, which is petition for your brother or sister, is backlogged 15 or 20 years. It really doesn't help people. So if we, it might be okay to get rid of that category, but really parents and parents and spouses and children, I think anybody would agree you want to keep a nuclear family together. And our president has taken well advantage of that provision of family migration, or chain migration as he calls it. We already do at some level have a merit-based system, and people say, that we don't, but our visa categories, such as the H1, the L1, the O1, there's a visa for every letter of the alphabet, but I don't want to go through them all, require either degrees, exceptional ability, extraordinary ability. So there are requirements.
So we do have
already.
Something like a point system.
We don't have points, but we have a merit. I would call it merit-based at some level,
Okay.
yes.
I also just wanted to add, I think that while there is value in looking at all those things, I think there is something also to be said for keeping America the land of opportunity. And I think a lot of us, have, maybe it's cliche, the American dream, but I think a lot of us do, sort of look back and see, grandparents that came here with very little and worked extremely hard, focused on education, focused on creating opportunities for their children, who in turn, did graduate from the schools that their, forefathers weren't able to, and that betterment of each generation. I think that there is something to be said for that. I do think it's a key principle and part of the fabric of our country, and so I think that should be taken into consideration as well when we're sort of looking at the overall scheme of our immigration
on this. Let's go back for a moment. What we were talking about earlier, Elizabeth, that is about the asylum seekers and what have you. There are certainly huge challenges, right? Of course, there's a challenge of getting to the border, which is a bit of an adventure, which, as you explained earlier, is dangerous. It's not funny at all. People don't make it. There's exploitation, human trafficking, accidents. I remember watching a documentary. There are all these kids that go on freight trains, going north. Some of them fall. lose limb. I mean, there are really tragedies along the way to go to El Norte, to go to the north, to get to finally to the border. So I say they finally get to the border. They do get across. They have a hearing. They are granted asylum. And then what happens? Because this is not like the end of this. That's just the beginning of the journey still. Even though you have a reprieve, whatever that is, you are legal or waiting for a hearing or whatever that is. And there's good chances that you and your family can be here in the U.S. legally. But that's only the beginning of the journey, because these people don't have money. Very often no education or very little education. They don't speak English. I know this is beyond, the technicalities of the legal process, but obviously we have to look into that, right? What are we doing to help these people that that helps them become, or at least shorten the time that it takes to get into the American mainstream?
So there are several resources, a lot at the state level, that provide, job training, certain health benefits or other kind of assistance for those who have been granted asylum. So there is kind of formal options in place for them. Also, what we see is the immigrant community itself is very welcoming and supportive, and so those individuals may have family members or other close friends within their community that help them kind of informally with those needs that they have.
Do you say, again, I know this varies, I'm sure, from community to community, from state to state. Mm-hmm. There is a concern, and again, I don't know if it's just how can I say, fear-mongering or what, to say, well, once upon a time, there was a stronger effort for new immigrants to integrate themselves and to become assimilated. And now, maybe not so much. Certainly we know of many people who can spend an entire lifetime as immigrants and not speak a word of English in the United States. I mean, maybe these are rare cases, but they do exist, right? Because they are in encompassed communities where they are among themselves. And that is, some people say, well, where does the United States end up here? A balkanized society of ethnic communities that don't really are not part of the mainstream. Is that just a huge, exaggeration? I mean, what do you see? Again, I don't know I'm sure there's data out there. There's some statistics and analysis that have been done. But would you say that in general, this kind of informal assimilation, American assimilation machine works reasonably well, or could stand some improvements?
I think it works well. I think if we see people who don't assimilate, it's usually the immigrant themselves, but then the children of those immigrants typically assimilate quite well. And there are studies out that people who come here, their children are the ones that graduate at the top of our classes from high schools and colleges and start companies in this country. So it may not be the first generation that is really assimilating, but the children usually do, and then it dilutes itself over the generations. So I think it was the same in our time, I mean, my grandparents came here, they were Italian, they lived in an Italian community, and, and then the Italian married the Lebanese, and then, and that no longer matters anymore.
So you would say overall the system is, with all its, we're all humans, right? We're not perfect, but so it works. In other words, the fact that we can assimilate and integrate various immigrants from all over the world and make them into Americans, I mean, whatever that means, that is working overall.
Overall, I mean, can it be tweaked and made better? Anything can be improved upon over time, but I don't think we should go looking to change that. It's what this country has been built on. It's our foundation. We have values of humanity and taking in people. So, that's part of our culture.
Let's talk for a moment. Thank you, by the way, for that. But let's talk for a moment now about this other huge problem that I guess different people of different political persuasions have tried to address, and that is the large number of illegal immigrants, or more politely, undocumented immigrants, estimated to be 11, 12 million. By definition, we really don't know, because since they're not counted officially, we don't exactly know how many. I do remember, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a major effort back in 2007, I think, that seemed to have some traction because it was a bipartisan effort. George W. Bush, say whatever you want about him and the war in Iraq and what have you, but he was behind it, right? There was a Republican president with a reasonably strong bipartisan coalition in the Senate, going all the way from Ted Kennedy to John McCain, Democrats and Republicans, that said, let's do something. We got to fix this thing. This is a huge anomaly. And then, of course, he was killed in the House. The Republicans in the House said, no way, amnesty, these are all lawbreakers, never. And basically, we're still there, right? Can you speak to that? Is there, now in this horribly divided political environment, I think it's hard to imagine any compromise anytime soon. But what happens to these people? These are people who are here. Some of them have been here maybe for 20 years or more, and they're illegal. What's the story?
Well, I think you're right. I don't think we're going to see anything coming out of Congress. And I think what we've seen coming out of the White House and the various branches of the executive administration are just creating adding to the problem. There were some policy changes put in place by the previous administration that have, been undone or been attempted to be undone by the current one, that are just adding to the numbers of people that are without status here in the U.S. I mean, when we look at DACA, while fortunately...
DACA stands for?
DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals.
These are the people who came here as kids, right?
It is. And essentially what the Obama administration did was took a concept that's existed for ages, a deferred action, which is a type of prosecutorial discretion where the immigration agencies are essentially saying, we know you're here, we know you're not supposed to be, but because we cannot deport everyone that isn't supposed to be
You'll
here,
you'll
get a pass because of certain factors. And so Obama kind of made a more blanket policy of that towards the people that qualified for this program that became known as DACA.
He used what
But
it's
then,
called.
I don't remember exactly the sequencing. When Trump came along, he said, well, the problem with this is that Obama abused his authority here, and what we need is a law, right? But then I'd say, so I want the Congress to pass a law. And of course, the Congress couldn't agree on the time of day, on anything. And so no law essentially was passed, right?
Correct.
And so the DACA issue is in limbo. Am I
Correct. So
correct?
Trump essentially ordered that DACA be ended, but then there's court challenges that have said that the reasons that he did that were wrong and were racially motivated based on statements that he made about Mexicans and other groups of immigrants. And so the court agreed with that, and there's currently an injunction keeping him from ending DACA and keeping DACA alive.
When we talk DACA, we talk about what, about 4 or 5. Well, how many millions of people would DACA have covered? A few million, right? I forgot exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact number.
But so that would be a significant chunk of the pool of illegal immigrants.
Yes.
Again, just since you're lawyers, I mean, many people say, especially politicians, etc., they say, no, these are not illegal. These are undocumented.
Right.
Well, what is it? Are they undocumented? They forgot their documents at home, or illegal? What is the technical?
Well, calling a person illegal,
it's not a good thing.
it's,
Right.
I mean, they might have crossed the border illegally, which is a misdemeanor, but they're not an illegal person.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just like we don't, you've broken the law, you've
But of course,
shoplifted,
it
we
has
don't call you illegal.
obviously the choice of term indicates some kind of a political objective,
Yes.
right? Because if you say illegal, my God, these are criminals, right? You know, my God, put them all in jail. Or I think it was Trump himself, if I remember, as a candidate, who said, you know, we're going to deport everybody, right?
Right.
Which is like easy, right? No problem. It takes a couple of days, right? Round everybody up and off they go. Where? Don't even know. But anyway, so if you are one of these individuals, especially those who've been here for a long time, technically speaking, you can be deported any day, right?
Well,
Or-
not necessarily.
No, I mean, there's a deportation process, right?
Correct.
So it takes some time. But I mean, this cloud is hanging above you, right?
Yeah, you can have CBP come knock on your door or raid your employer and be put into detention and detained while you're waiting for a hearing and something like that.
So, and again, we also know that, well, there have been some actions, and I don't know if this is purely for show. Even recently, a month ago or so, they raided meat packing districts or whatever in South, I forgot exactly which state, and they rounded up at least some people, you know, because of lack of proper papers and what have you. Do you see this activity, this enforcement activities being ratcheted up, or especially now that we are going into an election year and Trump, the president, wants to demonstrate to his base they were really tough on immigration? Again, this is not a legal issue. This is such a political issue of selective enforcement, I guess. How do you see this going, based on from your perspective as lawyers?
I think that it's not necessarily a change in the numbers of enforcement, but it's a change in the way that it's happening. Under the prior administration, there was this idea that they would have priorities with the enforcement, and that they would prioritize people with criminal records, people who had a history of violating immigration laws, individuals that hadn't been here for a long period of time and may not have many ties to the United States. And so there was a focus on that. And I think that was a much more sensible and helpful way to carry out enforcement than what we're seeing now, where, like you said, it's just this idea to create widespread fear. And I think, we've had a couple of instances where the administration will even, make these announcements that they're going to do all these raids and they're going to round up a certain amount of people, and there'll be widespread fear. And then they'll say, well, no, actually, we're going to do it next weekend. And so there's not a lot of sense or thought to the type of enforcement they're doing. It's really just based on fear.
Sorry, so I hear this.
Yes, someone's phone is ringing.
I think
No,
it's the
it's yours.
tablet.
I don't know what's going on here. It's been going.
You set a timer somehow
I
when you swipe it.
have no idea. Sorry, I apologize. We got too many. Can we?
We can answer the same question again.
Yeah, do you mind? Because
No, that's fine.
that ding, ding, ding.
Sure.
I had no idea what it was. So okay, sorry. Can you roll it back? Yeah,
Sure.
Sorry about that.
We were talking about enforcement and the way the current administration is handling it. And I mentioned that in the prior administration, while there was still a fair amount of enforcement that was carried out, there was an idea that enforcement would be carried out more sensibly and in a way that would prioritize who we looked to remove from the United States. And so there was a focus on people with criminal backgrounds, people who had violated the immigration laws continuously, those who may not have been here for a long period of time and not had long ties to the United States. And that created a certain, prediction or sensibility into what the way this would be carried out previously. And under the current administration, what we're seeing is as you said, just this creation of an atmosphere of fear, that anybody at any minute could be picked up. We see the administration making announcements that they're going to carry out these widespread enforcement actions, that really just are meant to sort of strike fear in communities.
So, just to put all this together, I mean, what we see then is, at least on the narrow but not so narrow issue of asylum seekers that the administration, at least for the moment, can seem to be able to carry out its own more restrictive policies. Then, as you were indicating, they're trying to restrict the number of people who will be eligible for work visas,
Yes.
right?
And
then,
it's through tactics like delay
Yes.
and request for evidence, so it just is taking much longer.
so in
and
other words,
a
the
lot
laws
more
on the
money.
books are the same, but it's a
Yes.
different level of enforcement.
Exactly.
That makes
And-
it more complicated
And changing the definition of terms within the regulations. So one example of that is the H-1B is for what they call a specialty occupation, where you have a job that requires a bachelor's degree in a related field, while it says a related field. So they're saying that now that if it's a job where you can say requires so let's say it's a financial analyst and you usually require a bachelor's degree in finance, economics, or a related field, then it's not a degree that's related. You have several, so then it's not a specialty occupation, although most people would agree that a financial analyst requires a bachelor's degree usually, and so they're challenging even, an economist. Is that a specialty occupation? Well, only if you require a degree in economics, but if you have an MBA, then you don't qualify. And so they're challenging it on very technical terms that only we in the field see on a daily basis.
So you find obviously your work more challenging because you have to process all these things and answer
even
all these
on the
questions.
legal side, there's a lot of anxiety and frustration and fear. And so you see a lot of people trying to go to the next secure level. If they're here as a permanent resident, they want citizenship. If a lot of people, if they're here on some sort of work visa, they want to try and go for their permanent resident status. And we see them trying to move forward that way.
But so all together, obviously we said it at the beginning, and I said this remains true. This is a country of immigrants, and so, but if you look at the United States from outside, you say, do I really want to try this thing? This looks really complicated, unless you're motivated by existential concerns like these asylum seekers that we talked about at the beginning, and even more recently now. So does it mean that America is kind of losing its appeal as a destination for enterprising young people who want to do something, because they say, you know what, too much trouble. This is really getting too complicated. And therefore we are discouraging people for pursuing, I think you mentioned this earlier, Linda, why do I want to go get a PhD in the United States? Because maybe, yes, they're prestigious academic institutions, but if I want to continue with a professional career after I got my coveted degree, it's so complicated that I may as well go to Canada or England or somewhere else.
It's so complicated and it takes a long time. So right now, for a backlog for about an Indian national to get a green card through our normal process, which is where you test the U.S. market, there's a backlog that some say would take 50 years to get a green card.
50?
Yes.
50?
Yes.
Oh boy, that's not very encouraging. You're dead before you get the green card.
Well, and then their children have aged out and they're not eligible to receive that benefit based on their work
So that means
here.
essentially
Yeah.
you can't get it.
Right.
If that's the timeline we're talking about.
And if it's not, some say 50 or 60, but it's really 15, at least 15 or 20 minimum right now with the backlogs that we have in some categories of green cards for people who are trying to do it, as people say, the legal way and stay here and keep their visas and work visas and keep going.
But so if they want to, again, for the the temporary limited time work visas, it's still possible, even though there are all these additional hurdles that you
Yes.
mentioned. But it's still doable.
Yeah, but I do think it's dissuading people from coming here, as I said before, foreign students, but also companies who want to open subsidiaries or entrepreneurs who want to open businesses. If we're making it difficult to transfer your key people to the United States on an L1 to open your subsidiary, then you're not going to do it here, and you may choose a different country. And once they make that decision, they're not going to turn back 3 years later once this country becomes more friendly
Liberal,
again.
yes.
You know, I mean, it's going to take decades for people to make that turn again.
One, again, just to put it all together again, and I know we're not doing political forecasting here, but given, again, the atmosphere in Washington right now and the deep divisions between Republicans and Democrats on this issue in particular, and the fact we're going into an election, any chance that you can see that one can generate or hammer together bipartisan agreement that will resolve or ameliorate these problems? In particular, I'm thinking about undocumented or illegal, whatever you want to call them, immigrants, that I think these are people who deserve to have a legal status or a path at least towards, legalization. Any chance of that happening?
I don't see it. There used to be a path for people to become legal. It was a section of law called 245I that if you were here undocumented and an employer sponsored you, when you came to the last step of the process to change your status to permanent resident, you had to pay a penalty fee. At the time, it was only $1,000. They could raise it to $10,000, and I think people would be happy still. And those people could become legal. And when you get a green card, all the background checks are done, criminal background checks. And so if there's anything in your history that makes you inadmissible anyway, you're not going to get that green card. So it was a process to get people here to change them from being illegal to legal.
And that's gone?
That went away after, I believe,
April 30th, 2001.
2001. Which is ironic, all of our major immigration reform that have given people kind of a path forward has been under Republican presidents. Our last major one was in Act 90, and that was Reagan.
Again, at that time, when Reagan, was it the Simpson-Mazzoli Act? Am I correct? Am I getting this right?
There was one with that name, and
yes,
the exact year of it,
I think it was 86. I may be wrong, and I apologize to the audience if I'm wrong. But that was supposed to be a great, moment of healing, right? Of let's fix everything, let's legalize everybody, but from now on there will be new markers and new things. That didn't work out too well. And I suppose the critics of immigration reform say, well, every time we do something, it is amnesty. And that encourages more people to break the law, come here, counting on the fact that eventually they'll be legalized. That's one of the harsh critics of legalization of the undocumented or illegal. People say amnesty is bad because it's an encouragement for more people to do the same thing. Again, I think there's, as I said at the beginning, it's a very emotional issue, and people are not really thinking about this very clearly. But in conclusion, I would say I really appreciate the fact that both of you in your different specializations are trying to help people. And I think that's the important thing,
That's what keeps us going.
I wish you good luck, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.